Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Brian Live. Fantastic to be back. We missed last week, and I really missed it. We got an awesome guest tonight, Byron Edgington, all the way from the States. Byron is a retired pilot. He's now a writer, author. He's got some fantastic books out we're going to chat about. And man, has he got some stories to tell. So to keep it, to get things going straight away, Byron, I know it's morning there for you, but good morning.
Good morning to both of you. And again, thanks very much. This is a great opportunity. I'm really enjoying this. And actually, good evening. Good evening to you.
Thanks, Byron. Yeah. Fantastic to have you on. Ryan actually has to take credit for finding you because he came into the office one day and he said, Brian, you won't believe I found this guy. I spent the whole weekend reading his books, and we got to get him on the show. So next thing, we had a meeting set up with you, and here you are. So fantastic, man.
It's great to be here. Let's do this thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, well, again, so from my side, Byron, a very warm welcome and thanks for joining us and making yourself available this evening. We've been looking forward to this for weeks now, a while in the making. And it's obviously given us the opportunity to read, well, for me at least, more than one of your books, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. And, it's you've got such an amazing style of writing. You really do sort of speak like a real pilot in your books, which I thoroughly enjoy. And without giving it what sort of too much of a spoiler alert, let's give you the floor and tell us a bit about yourself, Byron, where you've been and what you're up to, and a little bit about your books.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. I guess one of the first things I would mention, because I might forget to, is, as I mentioned in the book, in Post-Flight, an old pilot's logbook, those who start out flying should take notes. You should write things down. And there is some requirement to log certain hours, like training and so forth, and any hours toward a certificate. I get that. But I think people should take notes on a daily basis and journal about what you're doing, because before you know it, you're going to be sitting here as a retired pilot talking about what you used to do. And that's, you're going to be glad you did this. That's all. But enough of that. I'm going to talk about me for just a bit here and how I got started. And let me just start. I wrote the book kind of a linear fashion. It's kind of half, maybe more, maybe how to, maybe careers. If I walked into a bookstore today and looked for this book, Post-Flight, an old pilot's logbook, I would like to think they'd put it on the shelves in careers, because that's what it lends itself to. And I aimed it at young, aspiring pilots, because in fact, my tagline for the book is, this is the stuff I wish I had known when I started flying 50 years ago. And so that should give you some idea of how old I am. But it's just, and we pilots, I'd like to think this, I can't speak for all of them, of course, but I think we don't have any hesitation to talk about some of the things we've done we wish we hadn't done. And if you've flown for more than an hour or two, you've got one of those stories. We've all done things that should have come out better. We've gotten ourselves into situations that we took all of our experience to get out of. And so that's the way the book is written. It's written to share situations I found myself in that only experience got me out of. And it's kind of aviation, as you've probably heard. It's a very strange career that gives you the test first and the lesson later on. And so that's the way I oriented the book. And anyway, it's kind of linear. I wrote it, here's how I started. Here's how you can start. I have various chapters. I got 2 chapters, one on selecting the category, whether you should fly airplanes, whether you should fly helicopters, and the upsides and the downsides of doing both. I've got chapters on the care and feeding of your passengers, care and feeding of your mechanic, the care and feeding of your career. So I hope I touched on a lot of the things that young pilots would like to know. And at the end of each chapter, I've itemized the lessons from that chapter. And so that's the way it's organized. And I hope it benefits some young people. And I've also kind of oriented, I didn't write it for young women, but I have included in the book that it's important information. And I encourage young women to look at aviation as a career because, and this is something I never realized until I started researching all this. And you guys probably know the answer to this, but the number of women in the cockpits worldwide in commercial cockpits is 6%. And so, in the book, I encourage young women to take a look at this career because it's a viable career and it's a good one for everybody for that matter. And it's a career I will always miss it. So it's a great way to make a living. I never worked a day of my life. So anyway, that's kind of the short version of the story of where the book came from.
Oh, fantastic! I spent a while today going through it, and we'll let everyone know where you can find it there on Amazon shortly. A lot of what you speak about, Byron, is a lot of the stuff that we preach in the training environment. If in Africa, there's a quite a big majority of the pilots these days are 250-hour pilots with a fresh commercial license that are waiting for an opportunity. And for an example, with us at Simero, a large portion of our client base is from Nigeria, and in that region in particular, a lot of youngsters there with very few hours. And fortunately, in places like that, the airline industry is actually growing. New airlines are starting up despite this pandemic we find ourselves in. And a lot of the time in the classroom, we actually spend talking about a lot of the things you mentioned in this book, and a lot of it is mental. It's not necessarily the very technical aspects of the aircraft or all these things we think of when it comes to aviation training. A lot of it is, that little bit of advice you gave at the beginning, write stuff down. I remember, when I started my aviation training, I was also told whenever you have a simulator session or any form of training session, write down your notes from the debriefing. And you can research those before your next bit of recurrent training. I've ended up with books and books of notes, and I think a lot of that is lost on the newer generation because there's this sort of fast forward mentality where the guys and girls just want to get in the flight deck and they just want to fly, but it's actually a process. You got to start with the mental side, and you got to have a passion for it, and then take that passion and really work with it every day. Don't just assume it's things are going to happen. It's actually up to you to make it happen. So I love the book, and I'm going to use it in training for sure.
Good. I appreciate that, Brian.
Yeah, I think I could weigh in on there as well from a different angle as well. Growing up, I had the wonderful privilege to grow up in an aviation family. So, in my younger years, I was very fortunate enough to spend a lot of time around real pilots and airplanes, not like a lot of other youngsters out there. So, in my formative years, I got to hear firsthand a lot of hangar talk and the pilots exchanging stories as they came back from a flight, and saying, "Gee, that was a close one. And, how could we have done this better?" Usually was done around a few beers, and the language was a little bit more expletive, judging by the events that they had dodged.
Yeah.
But it was awesome for me to learn from real pilots, and the conversations and the lessons that came from that. And just like what Brian said now as well, I think a lot of that information today is actually lost on a lot of guys because it's concentrated so much in book of writing and everything. So your type of book, where it's autobiographical and it's got factual life lessons in it, is such a wonderful way to learn from an aviator like yourself, who's lived through it all and is lucky enough to be on the other side and tell the stories of it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brings up an important point too, that I don't remember doing this very much. Of course, I had, call it an advantage, if you will. I guess it was an advantage to me to be thrown into the war in Vietnam. And I was just immersed in aviation every day. And so that was an advantage in that sense, that it wasn't, I went to the local airport and to fly once a week for 2 hours. And then next week, it was every day. And during my year in Vietnam, I flew 1,200 hours.
Jeez.
And if you do the math, that's a lot of flying. But the point is, every single day, but I don't remember asking older pilots. Maybe I didn't have the opportunity because we were all about the same age there. We were these children flying in combat. But I would encourage younger people to ask older pilots, to engage them and question their experience. And because, for one thing, we older pilots love to talk about it. I do. We absolutely love it. And we really enjoy being asked about it, so don't ever, I would say, don't ever hesitate to approach a veteran pilot and say, what do you think about this? Tell me what happened here and how it could be better and all that, and because aviation, if nothing else, is a collaboration. It has to be a collaboration. And there's all kinds of people that come together to make it a safe and enjoyable and gratifying experience. And so be a part of that conversation. Yeah, I would encourage any pilot to just, whatever flight you just had or just completed, discuss it later on.
Yeah, especially coming from someone who's your era of aviation, you flew like in the golden years where flying really was flying. It was not like it is today, where it's very automated, very procedural and regulated. You were thrust into a situation where it was fight or flight, do or die, excuse the pun, but everything you had to really just learn by literally flying by the seat of your pants, for lack of better terminology. But so no doubt you guys have got the best way and the best stories to tell from that experience.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. And it also brings up, and I didn't talk about this too much in the book because, as I said, I retired many years ago, so I've been out of the business for a while. And I didn't want to try and address something that I'm not conversant with. But I think there is a danger with all the technology in the cockpits these days. I think there's a danger of a separation between basic skills. And you can tell me better about this. Maybe I'm on the wrong track here. But I think there should be between, with all the technology, I think that tends, or at least there's a potential for having a separation between basic piloting skills and the new technology and what's going on there. So I guess that kind of concerns me a little bit. But as I say, you guys can talk about that better than I can.
Byron, I think there's a concern that is happening before our eyes right now. When I started out and had my first real job, I was a junior first officer, and I was flying with very, very senior captains. And I learned a hell of a lot from those people. When I got into a regional airline here in South Africa called South African Express Airways, the path to command wasn't very fast. We actually spent 10 years sitting in the right seat before we got into the left seat. But there was a hell of a lot of advantages to that too, because a lot of those guys that were sitting in the left seat actually became sort of mentors of mine, and I learned a hell of a lot from those guys. Now, if you take the current situation, this global pandemic that we're going through right now, there's going to be a big experience gap in aviation. A lot of guys that have had to pull out or been furloughed. There's a quite a high percentage of those that are probably not going to find their way back into the flight deck. I know, speaking for myself, I mean, we had to go make another plan. It wasn't a case of, okay, well, let's just wait until a job appears. You've got a family to look after, and there's things to do. So you start hustling a bit, and you find possibly another path, and you don't get back into the seat. Therefore, you don't provide the mentorship opportunity that I was provided. And I think this is a major concern, because it's a factor, of course, in first world countries like you living in now, but it's a major, major concern in places like Africa, where you're going to end up with accelerated commands from the right to the left seat with the bare minimum amount of hours, but they haven't had the time in the seat flying with guys like yourself, listening to all those stories. One of my and Ryan's mentors, a man by the name of Mark Dutton, he had wonderful stories to tell, and he would tell them openly all the time, and you learn from things like that. But you also learn a lot by going across and actually reading a book like you've written, because what you've done is you've taken a lot of those stories and a lot of those things that you would normally talk about in the flight deck, I think, because as Ryan said, it's a little bit like flying with someone on a long flight and bouncing these stories. And that's what rung true with me today. So I'm actually going to really encourage any youngster out there, go and pick up your book and give it a read, because it is a little bit like flying with a real seasoned aviation professional.
Well, I appreciate it. I'll put you on commission. How's that? Yeah. Anyway.
Sorry, Byron, you broke up a sec there.
Oh, I was just going to tell you, I'll put you both on commission. Start peddling my book. Yeah. Yeah.
No, there's no need for that.
Yeah, that is the point. And, I guess one of the other things that I encourage young pilots, particularly in the book, is to be aware of, and I've got a lot of stories about this in the book, but I think you mentioned, I forget what the term you used, go-ahead-itis or something like that. There's a whole section in the book based on crew resource management. And is that taught in your schools? Is that a system that you use for safety?
Yeah, it is, Byron. It's a major part of the training. However, I think much of crew resource management, certainly what I've come across in my career, has been, I'm not going to say, poorly presented, because that wouldn't be fair on the people that presented it. However, it as far as I'm concerned, became very much a box ticking exercise where, it was a requirement to do crew resource management. Who's the cheapest company offering the quickest solution to get all our pilots, ready to go and operate. And it failed a little bit in that way. However, my big interest in aviation is the mental side of things and the human factor side of things. And we've managed to bring it in quite heavily into our training. All the online training that our students do is all heavily based around sort of human factors and the CRM side of things. And like I said, that to me, that's where the big gap is in terms of training. That is all the fine, intricate things that I learned from my mentors. And it's not an overnight thing. I don't believe you go and do one course and you're now proficient in CRM. I think that's one subject where, it requires reading, it requires a bit of research. It's like you said, asking questions and asking, pilots that are more senior to you about an opinion about something. So it doesn't start and end in the classroom, but yeah, it is part of our training, but I think it's had its flaws here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's I want to get, first of all, I should thank you for classifying the U.S. as a first world country. I'm not. There are a lot of people right now, myself included, who would kind of question that designation. But be that as it may, the CRM thing, it's kind of, because I'm a CRM instructor myself, and it's always irritated me to some extent that there are people flying these multi-million-dollar aircraft and lots of people's lives in their hands, and the whole, expensive, intricate connection, all that together, but they won't spend the time and money to get instructors into their people to bring out, in other words, it is over here too. It's a check the box exercise. It's something that you do every year. Most people do it on a computer and just get it done. And there's nearly as much emphasis put on, in my opinion, as there ought to be. And if you look at the statistics before and after CRM, they're pretty amazing, the difference in the safety profile across the board. So, and I should mention too that CRM works in single pilot environments. There's no reason it has to be a multi. In fact, if I have time here, I'll tell you a quick story from the book. I put this in the book about how CRM, who knows, because it's speculation, but it probably at least saved me a great deal of embarrassment one afternoon. When I'd landed the helicopter at a remote site away from the hospital when I was flying air medical. And as soon as I got the engine off and the blade stopped, one of the rural hospital security guards came out to me. And this fellow said, "Now, I don't know if this means anything or not, but when you were landing, there were sparks coming out of your engine." I was a little single engine helicopter. And he said, "It looked like somebody had flicked a cigarette out a few times." And I could have told the guy, "Oh yeah, that happens a lot." But I didn't. I thought, wait a minute, what is he telling me here? And it turns out, I'll cut to the chase, I got my mechanic to come up there. It took him 2 hours to drive up there. He got up on top of the helicopter and looked in at the compressor, the first stage of compression, and with a flashlight. And the first thing he said to me was, "Man, you are so grounded." And I said, "Why? What happened?" Anyway, it turns out that engine had ingested something hard, and it had torn up the compressor blades. And that's where the sparks were coming from. And my point of the story is, even though he had no wings on his chest, even though he probably had never flown anything in his life, that hospital security guard was part of my crew right then. Because he saw something that didn't make sense to him, and he thought I should know about it, and he spoke up. And, they had to change out the engine in the aircraft. So, I wrote the guy, I didn't write him, I called him, I told him, I thanked him for speaking up. Because that's really a big part of what CRM is about, is if something doesn't feel right to you or look right, raise your hand and say something, So
that's an amazing story, Byron. I mean, and it's so true. I mean, first of all, there's obviously something that no amount of duct tape would have fixed on the afternoon. But yeah, when I was reading your books, I'm glad this topic came up, because it was going to be a question I was going to ask you, was how does a helicopter pilot who's flown, a single crew most of his career become so invested in CRM? That fascinated me. It was one of the questions I had for you, was because for us, being in an airline environment, our CRM training was always driven towards, the cockpit gradients, dealing with cabin crew, and I suppose very little of it was ever really emphasized on all the external factors towards CRM and the other members of your aviation community that contribute to your, the safety of your flight and to, like you said, the general CRM in total. So yeah, fantastic lesson there, Byron. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, there's another chapter. I think I mentioned the chapter I wrote, 2 chapters, one on fixed wing, one on rotary wing, and the benefits and downsides to each one. And I should mention one of the reasons I had a chance to fly for the airlines many years ago, and I turned it down. I'm glad I did, because, and this is just a personal opinion, personal preference for me, I really enjoyed being the pilot. I really enjoyed single pilot operations. And it was limiting in some ways because, and anybody who goes into aviation expecting to get rich, I got news for them. They should probably become an author or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed being the pilot. It's just, again, that's my personal preference. But we use CRM to answer your question, Ryan. We use CRM we started it when I was flying air medical. And I flew every time I took off, I had 2 flight nurses on board with me. And so that was the basis of our crew resource management. And the reason that I got so heavily involved in it myself was, and I don't know what it's like. Do you have air medical helicopters in various countries in Africa? Is that something that African countries are invested in?
Yeah, there are quite a few here, operators in South Africa that operate aeromedical helicopters. In fact, I used to fly for a medevac outfit as well before I joined the airline, but I was on the fixed wing fleet. And yeah, we often used to go and fetch patients with a fixed wing and then transfer them to the helicopters to continue onto the hospital. So yeah, so I understand that. Yeah, there's definitely there has to be some sort of CRM in the mix there. It makes sense.
Yeah, and partly because at the time I started learning CRM and becoming an instructor in it, quite frankly, the accident rate in air medical, in the States at least, was just unacceptable. I mean, we were killing people, a dozen a year or something in air medical. It was just nuts. And another thing I said in the book, and you guys can relate to this, we're not inventing any new ways to crash aircraft and to hurt ourselves. We're just doing the same things all over again. And so CRM in air medical, at least in that setting, recognized that. And that's the basis for it in air medical, was to present the same scenarios over and over again. And let's face it, probably 75% of the accidents in that business were weather-based. And in fact, this has been one of my criticisms of the air medical system here and the model, if you will. We're sending pilots out on single engine VFR only helicopters. And so, a lot of them are flying in weather they shouldn't be in. And I don't know if this is still true or not. I should qualify that because, as I say, I've been out of the business for a lot of years, and I think it's better now. But when I started flying air medical, we had the bare bones equipment. We were single pilot, single engine, and there was just no backups, in other words. And one of the things that always enhances safety in an aviation environment is backup systems. That you always have some kind of a plan B that you can use. And we didn't have anything like that back then. And Ryan, you talked about flying by the seat of your pants. I mean, we were just making it up as we went along in those days. And so in a way, it wasn't terribly surprising that there were accidents, as many as there were. So that's where the CRM, the impetus for CRM came into air medical. Yeah. So.
Byron, can you, just before we get further ahead, can you tell us some stories there about flying in Vietnam? And I know a lot of the people that listen to us mostly involved in the commercial airline side of things, all scattered across the globe. And most of us, haven't had the opportunity to do that seat of your pants type of flying. And I think it excites any airline pilot, any form of excitement excites us. So why don't you just give us some insight there into what it must have been like flying all those hours on the military side of things?
Yeah, it was, I guess the first word that comes in my head is Darwinian, and I hate to use that term, but that's kind of what it was. And because, I look back at these kids. I mean, I turned 21 years old in Vietnam. And when I arrived in Vietnam, I had 200 hours of flight time. And then they put me in the seat of a Huey and said, here you go. Now, I wasn't an aircraft commander at the time. I don't know what you call a left seat, just a captain, I guess. Yeah. Over there, we call him an aircraft commander. And about the first month or so that I was in Vietnam, I sat in the right seat of the helicopter, and the aircraft commander basically said, here you go, sit on your hands, don't touch anything, and just pay attention, which is, once in a while, he'd let me tune the radios and make a call or something, So, but once I became an aircraft commander myself, the learning curve was really steep. I mean, it was Darwinian. You had to really pay attention to what you were doing. And it was the first exposure I had to the crew concept, because the guys behind me, the door gunner and the crew chief, those guys were my eyes and ears. And I guess you could say that was my first exposure, even though I didn't know it at the time. It was my first exposure to CRM, because the older guys told me from the outset, pay attention to your crew. If they're not comfortable, there's something going on. And so I learned to listen to those guys. And I have a fellow, I'll give him a shout out, a guy named Gil Alvarado was my crew chief, and he sat behind me for a year, and he saved my story but more than once. So, but in some of the stories, for example, I'll give you a quick example. I landed in a landing zone one afternoon, and the guys that we were carrying, these American troops, every one of these guys had like 75 pounds of equipment on their back in a pack. And they were kind of like turtles. They took their shells with them everywhere they went. But I was about to land the helicopter, and one of these guys, they like to jump out and get to work right away. So one of these guys jumped out, and when he jumped, that heavy pack pulled him backwards, and he fell directly underneath the skids of my helicopter. And at that moment, just at that instant, Gil behind me yelled at me not to land. Don't put it down. Don't put it down. And so, of course, I stopped. I didn't land all the way, but I put the skids right directly across that guy's chest. If I put the pitch down and landed, I would have probably killed him. So that was the value of having that guy behind me looking out for me, because I couldn't see the guy where I was. I felt him jump out, but I thought he was gone. And there he was directly underneath my helicopter. And so it's just stories like that, in fact, this leads me into my discussion of situational awareness. And this is something that a young pilot, fresh out of the box, just recently soloed. I mean, speaking of a learning curve, there's nothing steeper like that. And, if I had the day, I remember the day I soloed like it was yesterday. I landed the helicopter, and the instructor got out of the thing, and I said, wait, where the hell is he going? And he buckled up his seatbelt, and he says, okay, give me 3 laps around the pattern. And I took a deep breath, and scared to death, I soloed that helicopter. It gave him 3 traffic patterns and landed. But if I had gone out to do a real mission at that point, you wouldn't be talking to me right now. I may have been a pilot, but that was the end of it. So I get into that learning curve, and I had no situational awareness at that point. It was all immediate, right here in front of me. I had no way of looking at the bigger picture. And when you cultivate that over time and get some experience, then you start looking back at the things you did and how you could do them better. And so I think situational awareness is something that, I mean, it's a lifesaver, that's all. And you guys know that as well as I do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's not something that you just naturally born with. It's something that grows with experience. And I suppose the more you get used to the flying environment and become comfortable with the dangers associated with that, the more it frees up the RAM in your brain to pay attention to more peripheral sort of things around you. And yeah, that's quite a story. I took an extract from your book. Going solo, was that one of the afternoons that you referred to back in, was it June 1969, where you made mention that it was hotter than a honeymoon mattress? Sorry, I had to put that out there because it's the style of writing that I just thoroughly enjoy. I mean, such a gas. I love it.
Good. I'm glad you liked it.
And that's what you can expect from Byron's books, is that kind of reading. It's great fun.
Yeah.
It sounds like one of your LinkedIn posts, Ron.
Something like that.
I'll have to check into more of his links.
Byron, chapter 7 is stretching the rules. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, let me do that. That's a good, I'm glad you brought that up. Many years ago in Washington, D.C., taking off from Washington National Airport in D.C. here in the States. And this is kind of a famous accident, if you will. If accidents can be famous, this one is. This crew of a 737, and they took off from National Airport with ice on the wings. It was a miserable, wintry, snowy January day. And I don't know if you're familiar with this accident or not, but they took off from National Airport. And again, I don't know too much about exhaust pressure ratios and all that, but the pitot tubes in the airplane were plugged up. And it gave them false readings in the cockpit. And they ran out of airspeed and ideas and everything at the same time, and they stalled, and they crashed into a bridge, into a river. And I know there was 78 fatalities out of 85 or something like that. But they put the airplane in the simulator later on and went through all the profiles. And that airplane would have flown if they had just put the throttles to the metal, to the front, and given it all the power. But they had been instructed from day one to never go past the red lines on the gauges. And that's what drove their decision. They would not do that for the fear of damaging the engine. Instead of damaging the engines, they crashed the airplane. And that's where that title of that chapter came from. You do whatever you got to do to get yourself out of a pickle. And if it means damaging the engines, that's what they're there for. If you got power left, use it, And the example in my own personal background, I was in Vietnam, I think it was in September of 1970, and we were picking up a bunch of guys from a hillside, and they were under fire, and they had to leave the area. And I went in, and I picked them up, and I couldn't land. I had to drop a ladder out the side of the helicopter. And as soon as I did that, the guys started coming up the ladder and got into the helicopter. And there were too many of them came up there, and I was full of gas at the time. It was heavy. It was a hot day. And then I couldn't figure out how to take off because I didn't have enough power. And in a helicopter, if you add too much power, your RPM starts to bleed off. And that's never good. But the way I got out of it was the tail rotor, the little tiny rotor in the back, it takes 15% of the power. And I got to thinking at the point, there's no reason in the world I need to be lined up straight. That's not important right now. So I let go of the tail rotor pedals, and the aircraft jawed off to the right like I knew it would, but I got a lot of power back and I managed to take off. And so did I damage that aircraft? Well, it turns out I didn't, but that wasn't my priority at that point. My priority was getting those guys out of that landing zone. And so I did what I had to do. So anyway, that's the short version of that chapter. Yeah.
That's a cool story. I love stuff like that. I think that sort of thinking is what separates the good pilots from the great pilots. You know, the ones that can do that little bit extra. I flew one of the other mentors that I flew with, a lovely old man that's passed on, Peter Ovenstone. He had just a lovely attitude towards flying, similar to that. Just do what you have to do. Sometimes, maybe in terms of training these days, there's too much information sometimes that is going through certainly the young pilot's mind, and you need to simplify it. You know, we always mention those words: aviate, navigate, communicate, to try and bring it back to the bare bones of simplification. Even saying those words out aloud, I think, can help you sometimes. So wonderful to hear it from that perspective, Byron. Obviously, you watching aviation now as a retired pilot, and I'm sure it hurts you to see what's going on around the world. You know, with all the airlines furloughing thousands of pilots, and I know in the States things are picking up nicely, but certainly in other parts of the world we're nowhere near where we were in 2019. You know, how are you looking at things? And, you know, I'm sure it hurts you.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is one of the reasons that one of the things that drove the writing in the book was that I'm not sure there's ever been a better time to get into aviation. But there's also never been a better time to really pay attention and to ask the old people that you run into, and to try to absorb as much of their experience as you can. Because, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think you referred to this, that a lot of veterans, a lot of the older pilots are just hanging up their headsets. They're just saying, you know, it's been a good career, but I'm going to do something else. I'm not going to do it anymore. And so, yeah, I think, and it's probably the best time in the world to really get crew resource management skills, and to make sure that everybody knows those and uses them well. Because I think there is going to be probably, you know, and I'm speculating here, but there's probably going to be a decrease in the experience level overall, I'm guessing. Maybe there already has been. Yeah. Yeah, and of course that's going to put an additional emphasis on simulator flying, and you know, and probably I would hope it will present more opportunities for simulator use, because I don't think there's anything better as a backup. So we talked about backup systems, because I spent a fair amount of time in a simulator, and they're, you know, light years ahead now of where they were when I flew them. But a lot of that training, as you know better than I do, that's very realistic training. And if, in fact, I understand, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I understand you can get certificates in a simulator now that used to be you had to fly the airplane to do that in. Is that true?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah. So
I certainly agree with that to a point. You know, I'm glad we're touching on this, because it's something that we've spoken about in previous shows. And I know it's coming. There's definitely going to be an experience gap, particularly because guys aren't going to have the opportunity, like Brian and myself, to fly with ex-Air Force helicopter pilots who were very fond of telling their stories and sharing their experiences. Something that I think you lose in the simulator, though, is that real life feeling, particularly, for instance, when you're flying in bad weather and you have a problem at the same time. And when you're inexperienced, you know, having that guy sitting on your left-hand side who's been through it before and seen most of it, he shows you how big the envelope can actually be stretched. If you allow yourself to gain that experience and learn from him. So no, I'm all for simulator training, and I think it's fantastic. But I have certainly seen and experienced some of the pitfalls that are are part of simulator training. You certainly do get to practice a lot, and you can become very procedurally competent. But there's something about the real world flying environment that we've all had it, where you have those moments where you think, what am I actually doing here?
Yeah.
And then you've got to get through it and get the airplane on the ground safely.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. And I don't know why I just thought of this just now, but I mentioned this guy, Stephen, I'll think of his name. But one other thing that young pilots should really take to heart is, especially as the experience level diminishes from the top down, he mentioned a thing he called the Dano response. And the short version of the story is that if you find yourself confronted with a situation that is over your pay grade, you don't have the experience to do this, you're not happy with the equipment, you're not comfortable with the mission, he said, just use the Dano response. And what he meant by that was, keep a lot of money keep $500 in your back pocket and a couple of credit cards. Because if you're confronted with that kind of thing, just say, Dano freaking way, I'm doing that. and walk out the door, And he said, having that money and the credit cards in your pocket allows you to get home and to put it behind you and go on and fly another day. So, but anyway, and I wrote to the guy, when he gave me that quote, I wrote back to him. I said, Stephen, no way I was leaving that out of the book. So,
No, that's awesome.
Yeah. And I should mention too, it's a good opportunity for me. I should thank all my collaborators, because as you know, I got stories and anecdotal things and advice from what, as I mentioned, that aviation is a collaboration. Of course it is. And so writing this book, because I got a lot of help from a lot of people, and I just wanted to thank them for whoever happens to see this, because I'm sure that a lot of folks said, because I'm going to advertise it for you. But thanks to all my collaborators, I got some great stories from people, and I really appreciate the efforts that they put into it. So.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome, Byron. And now the show ends up going so fast. We're 50 minutes into it already, and I want to let people know, what's the book called? Where can they find it? Where can they find you? And maybe anything else that will help us here in South Africa, and certainly mostly our South African audience and South African expat pilots around the world. How can they connect with you?
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity to put it out there. I'm Post-Flight, an old pilot's logbook, and it's on Amazon. It's available in paperback, hardback, and digital for e-readers. So it's essentially available anywhere you go to books on Amazon, look for that title, or look for my name, Byron Edgington. Or you can go to my website, byronedgington.com, and you can access the book there. In fact, you can access all my books on my website. And I hope you do. And I should, before I forget to mention it, anybody who reads it, please write me a review. And because reviews are very, very important. So, but anybody who reads it, I appreciate them doing that, and write me a review, and I will be a very happy guy. So, yeah.
No, we'll do that for sure, and we'll push it from our side. We'll actually leave the link to the Amazon page in our show notes.
Okay.
So if you want to find Byron's book, it'll be there in the show notes. Ryan, like I said, you found Byron. You were intrigued by what he had to say, and after going through Byron's book and listening to him tonight, I can see why, because it's Byron's stories are just up your alley. Any last words there from your side, Cuz?
Absolutely, yeah. No, it was awesome. I mean, I think Byron actually reached out to me via an email one afternoon, and I was intrigued. And he said he would like to try and connect with podcasters and stuff. I saw this as an opportunity to obviously have Byron on the show, and immediately I thought, got to get one of his books and start reading it, and I was baited from there. I mean, like I say, there's so many things that resonated with me whilst reading your book. Obviously, I've done a bit of medevac flying myself, so I could understand. Also, having flown with many helo pilots in the cockpits, or ex-Air Force helo pilots, not one of them ever had a bad story to tell. They were always so fond of their helicopter flying in the Air Force days, and every single one of those guys that we flew with always said they would give their left one to be able to jump back into a helicopter and do that again. And I also just must mention, I said it before earlier, but Byron's style of writing for me was really cool. It's an easy read. It's such a gas. The humor in there is right up my alley, and I think people will definitely enjoy the book. In fact, I got through it so quickly. I was disappointed that I'd leveled that book inside of nearly 24 hours. So Byron, you need to write thicker books, man.
I'll write bigger books next year. I'll get busy and write a doorstop or something.
Last question for you, Byron. Fixed wing or rotary?
Oh, I have to go rotary.
I knew you would say that.
Yeah, no, I just, as I said, I had a chance to fly for the airlines, and it's personal preference. That's all. But I just really, really enjoyed single pilot operations. I really enjoyed being responsible for that aircraft and for myself and my crew. And so I'd go rotary wing. Yeah.
Fully understand that.
Yeah. So
come to think of it, Byron's actually the very first helicopter pilot we've ever interviewed on our show. So
really? Oh wow.
So while we're handing out accolades, you're number one, Byron.
Wow.
And American.
Oh, no kidding. Okay, well, I guess that's a privilege. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's been fantastic chatting tonight, Byron. I really, really enjoyed it. And I know a lot of our listeners will take a lot from what you had to say. I always get a kick out of hearing the old school stories. And let's face it. I think as you get older in life, myself now, don't regard myself a youngster anymore. You tend to hear less of the stories, because I don't know if it's because the older guys, maybe feel that they don't want to, tell you all the stories anymore. But I suppose there's less opportunity to get that. So really nice to hear some of the old school stories, and of course, find them all in your book. I'm going to say cheers to you now, Byron, and no doubt we're going to keep in touch. I don't think it'll be the last time we chat. I wish you all the best for your book, and please keep in touch with myself and Ryan, and hopefully have you on again in our next live series we plan to do soon.
Yeah, gentlemen, thank you very much. And just if I have a second or two, one last thought to all those young pilots out there. So you're going to be old pilots someday. Fly as long as you possibly can. Don't ever give it up until you're really ready to give it up, because it's a wonderful way to live.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys, and thanks to everyone listening tonight and everyone that always tunes in for our live show. It really is fantastic. We've made a few comments on what we're going to do with the live show. And we haven't fully decided yet. We're going to do it in a series type basis. Obviously, it does take up a bit of our time, real estate we have available in the week. So Ryan and I have decided to do it more in a series type base. So this one was the In Conversation With series. So we'll take a little break from it now, and then of course be back for another live series with some new guests and possibly some old ones. Jason, you there tonight, so no doubt you're going to be back. Jason Always got. He's actually, Jason's a youngster with lots of old school stories. So he's a unique guy. But yeah, we're going to be back for the live show. Of course, please tune in for our studio-based show on Friday. It'll come out every Friday. And Ryan and I are going to maybe try something a little bit different for this week's show. So yeah, maybe we'll be in the studio a bit and taking a walk around, having a bit of a chat as well, because aviation news this week a little bit on the light side, so we're gonna mix it up a little bit. Tune in for that. And yeah, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for tonight. There's the book, Byron. Just hang on a sec, keep it up there. I'll put you on solo. That's it. Post-flight and old pilot's logbook. Awesome. Thanks, Byron. Thanks for tonight. Thanks, everyone. Cheers for now.
Thank you.